Hi, I'm Vickie Pavia. I'm the Senior Director of Patient Services and Distribution here at BeiGene. It's the 10th anniversary of Blood Cancer Awareness Month and the 10th anniversary of BeiGene. We're going to have a conversation today about living with blood cancer and or caring for someone living with blood cancer. And our hope is for the future of blood cancer research and development. I would love to turn it over to you, Chris, as an ambassador from the Lymphoma Research Foundation. So we have Chris Zawodowski. Chris's dad was diagnosed with peripheral T-cell lymphoma back in 2008. And thanks to a clinical trial, his dad is now cancer-free. Chris is a strong voice for caregivers working behind the scenes for their loved ones. He is also a strong advocate for clinical trials and research. Chris lives in Northern Virginia, where he runs his own marketing business and directs music theater as well. So thanks for joining us today, Chris.
Thank you, Vickie. I'm excited to be here and chat with you today.
I thought I would take the next few minutes just to ask you a few questions and then turn it back over to you to ask me some questions, if that sounds great.
Sure. Sounds like a plan.
Awesome. So I'm curious, what compels you to share your story, not only with us, but with others?
Well, like you mentioned, back in 2008, my dad was diagnosed with a peripheral T-cell lymphoma, but it's a very rare, very aggressive lymphoma. And still, unfortunately, to this day, there's no standardized effective treatment. And the odds are about 80% of the people that get it don't survive past a few years. So it's really not one that you want to get. And fortunately, my dad beat it and is still alive today and thriving. But it was because of a clinical research study. In fact, every specialist we saw, they said that if it was us, or if it was my dad, or we were in that situation, we would go into a clinical trial because there's nothing else that we really can offer you off the shelf that has great odds. So in my own family, we've seen firsthand what clinical research can do to save somebody's life and the importance of it. So one of the reasons I'm involved with the Lymphoma Research Foundation as an ambassador and do events like this with them and write articles and share our family story is because clinical research saved my dad's life and kept my family together. I mean, we've had many more birthdays and Christmas celebrations, Thanksgiving, and all of that because of clinical trials. So raising awareness for that and supporting that and shining more spotlights on that is so important because that's the only way we're going to find more cures and get to a world without cancer. There's no other way we're going to do it. But also because there are many other people out there that are in situations, unfortunately, like we were, where there were so many questions and it was so scary and you don't know if you're going to have that next birthday in just a few months, or if you're going to be together, and at the end of the year. That we want to also share hope and inspire other people and help lift them up to let them know there are a lot of amazing things still happening out there, and there are great breakthroughs that are happening. But also just to give people a sense of kind of 101 type things. There's so many things we had to figure out ourselves and become great advocates for, which might come up today in our chat, but that we had to do ourselves that a lot of people I know now over the last 12 plus years that have been kind of helping friends and family and dealing with a lot of the patients that have gone through this, things that I mentioned that we figured out that helped us. They're like, oh, geez, I never thought about that. So there's all these little things that you can do to kind of or lighten the load and, relieve the burden a little bit too in the whole process. So that's why I advocate a lot for the caregivers and the people that are, behind the scenes having to do all the heavy lifting because somebody who's going through cancer or going through treatments, they're not 100% at that point in time. So there's probably, there's three different reasons really why it's so important to me to continue to share our story and to advocate for clinical research.
No, that's great. I'm always curious because, it's great to hear your personal story, but how great your dad is doing now. So that's always wonderful to hear. But I'm always curious, right? Because from the time that your father was diagnosed up until today, I'm sure there has been some bumps and challenges that, you guys have faced. So I'm curious, what were some of those challenges that looking back, you're like, wow, that was a rough time because of X, Y, or Z?
Yeah, well, because it's a rare cancer, and now just with the lymphoma alone, there's basically when I started as an ambassador, it was 67 different subtypes of lymphoma. Now we're up to 100 different subtypes of lymphoma, and I'm sure in a few years from now there'll be 110 and 120 as doctors are distinguishing greater and greater, making more distinctions between all these different types of lymphoma and subtypes, and how each one has to be treated a little bit differently. So we realize the importance of several things, one being a great pathologist and somebody that is looking at this type of cancer day in and day out. With 100 different types out there, or even, back then when it was 67 of them or 70, however many there are, that's a lot for somebody to know what they're looking at under a microscope. And for the type my dad had, the local oncologist at the local community hospital that first diagnosed, figured, okay, we're dealing with cancer here. If she sees one of these types of cancers that my dad had in a year, that would be a lot for her.
Wow.
So, and it was his slides and everything were sent off to one of the national labs, but even they came back with a suspicious for peripheral T-cell lymphoma. They weren't 100% sure. So, when we got it, fortunately, to one of the top pathologists who was on the Lymphoma Research Foundation's scientific advisory board, wrote a lot of the protocols for lymphoma, was working at NIH at the time, and just for a second opinion said, hey, can you take a look at this? And within 48 hours, she's like, boom, this is exactly what it is. This is the type.
Wow.
We've got a clinical research study and kind of got the ball rolling. And I know from other people I've interacted with that where they think it's one type of cancer and they find out later on it's another type of cancer, or it's just baffling the people. It was over 6 weeks from the time my dad had his biopsies done to the time that we had a diagnosis. And he was stage 4. It was in his bone marrow and his blood, metastasized in his ribs, metastasized in his leg. He was knocking on death's door. So it was every day. I was calling the lab saying, what are the results? And what more can you do than just being the squeaky wheel?
Yep.
But it was over 6 weeks to get a diagnosis, or to get that back with suspicious for. Then we got it off for a second opinion. So we realized the importance of dealing with experts that know what they're looking at. So the pathologists are critical because they're the ones looking at it under the slides, and then them working with an oncologist that also then knows what they're dealing with. Now, the great thing is there are amazing comprehensive cancer centers. They're labeled that, they get certified that. They're all over the country. And when I have friends that are diagnosed or getting sick or have a problem, I look up the nearest one to them and get them off to some amazing facility. Usually, but they're all around the country. But getting to a place where you're dealing with the best experts for second, third opinion is critical. I don't care how many times I'm talking, what I'm talking about. I'm always encouraging people to get those second and third opinions, because for my dad, not just for this, but from other things he's had in his life, literally saved his life. Like if we had stayed at a local hospital and just done what she wanted to do, the treatment, he wouldn't be alive today. So I think it's really important for people out there to know that they have to be their best patient, like their best advocate. Even if you're with the best doctor in the world, the number one doctor, the number one facility, you as a family or loved ones or the person going through it have to be the one that's asking all the questions and pushing forward more on everyone. So dealing with the diagnosis was a big problem, a big challenge for us, I should say. And then we just started looking around and kind of moving up to the top doctors. Now, if there's any ailment he has or any other type of medical thing, or if my mom or whatever, like we look around and now, okay, who are the best people for this in our area? I think a lot of people, unfortunately, just because someone has MD behind their name, they think that, whatever they say just has to be 100% right, but they're human and they can make mistakes, or they might not be as well versed in this. So that's why I think it's important for people, if it's anything life-threatening, to find the organization, find the association out there. And of course, if it's blood cancer, call the Lymphoma Research Foundation. They're the number one game in the world for everything lymphoma. You can call their helpline and they give you free help. And there's tons, but all these other great associations out there for different types of illnesses have something like that. Yeah. And people should be plugging into that and saying, hey, what don't I know? What questions should I be asking? Where should I be going? So those were the big challenges. And then if he had about 650 hours of chemotherapy across the year with a monoclonal antibody added in, they were testing that they don't even use it anymore. Of course, he was one of the 2 people, I think, in the study that are alive today out of, I think it was about 30 or so. And so there were a few complications and, of course, the chemotherapy side effects and infection that came later and things like that that were all able to be managed.
Yep.
But it was the beginning part of it and just trying to get the right answers that was just
I can't
really,
even
really
imagine.
challenging.
That's what's so great, though, about having you speak with us today, but also other people, other caregivers and other patients who are either newly diagnosed or going through treatment. I think you're kind of like a breath of fresh air, right? You're not a physician, but yet your experience is so relevant to what they're going through. And, I bet you're able to kind of help them and guide them through maybe some big decisions that they're facing or maybe that they're struggling with. So that's great.
Yeah, they're not alone. It might feel like it sometimes, but you're not alone. There are people out that have been going through it right now or who have been through it that are, in your corner to help you.
Well, I was going to see maybe what questions maybe that you had for me that I thought I could answer.
Well, what's your background? Like, how did you get into this cancer world? I always have so much admiration for people that are in the trenches, fighting the good fight, trying to move us one step closer to cures for people. So how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, no, great question. I mean, I've been really started my career right outside of college, really on the front lines in terms of being on the phone with patients and caregivers and healthcare providers.
So you've only been in this field for 2 years then? That's amazing.
Right. You're too kind.
That's amazing. So you're just getting started.
Oh, too funny. No, and it's funny because I started as a case manager. So I would help patients when they would call in, help them through the insurance navigation process, helping them understand what their coverage would be for their insurance. Oftentimes I spoke to caregivers like yourself, because as you know all too well, right? Understanding the complexities of insurance can get pretty crazy. Even I have to, reread kind of some of my statement of benefits that, my insurance plan will send me. And then working with providers as well to make sure we help them through the process and getting access to various therapies depending on the pharmaceutical company that I worked for at the time. But really worked my way up and have been leading, patient support programs, I would say, for 90% of my career. So worked at 3 different pharmaceutical companies, building and administering patient support programs, most of that in oncology, specifically hematology. So a lot of what you're sharing today is very relevant to what I get to do every day. And I would say, my role's a little unique in the fact that it's very closely tied to patients. I mean, I get to deal with patients and caregivers and healthcare providers all the time. And sometimes that's not directly one-on-one like a physician would, but I think I get to hear their stories and see them gain access to maybe much needed medication. That's their last hope, whether it's on the caregiver side or them helping their patient gain access to it. So it feels like a long journey right now, but it's been really rewarding. And I think just on my side, attending different focus groups, whether it's with caregivers or patients, being able to hear firsthand what their issues are and what they struggle with. And I think that always helps me in my role to make sure that we're offering the best services to our customers, which to us, it's caregivers, it's patients, it's healthcare providers.
What in your role then with a pharmaceutical company, what type of services or what do you provide to to patients and for, what resources exist out there for a patient in a role with a pharmaceutical company versus I'm used, obviously for going to a hospital or we're dealing with someone, a caseworker and those types of settings, but how does that differ a little bit in, when you're directly representing a company?
Yeah, no, I think great question. I think half of, what we've tried to design in a patient support program is, access and affordability. Those are obviously very key fundamentals of the program. But I think BeiGene as a company really wanted to take it a step further and really try to design a program that where we were able to address kind of the needs of a total patient. So again, it's not only getting the product in hand and making sure they're taking it as prescribed by their physician, but it's, hey, as you stated earlier, there are hundreds of advocacy organizations out there. And I think asking a patient who is either newly diagnosed or maybe has relapsed and now is starting a third therapy within their cancer journey, and having them having to go on the internet, try to find resources, because maybe they're having a hard time with getting to and from doctor's appointments, right? Maybe they suffer from depression. Maybe they don't have a strong support system like your dad had in you. And so really we want to help to alleviate that burden by connecting these patients to the right advocacy organization at the right time, just depending on their most pressing need. So we've hired nurses, oncology nurses who have extensive background in this space, who are well equipped, in my opinion, to help not only on the emotional side, but also help with connecting them to the right organization. And I think that's really helped the patients and the caregivers, right? Because our program's not just set up just for patients, but you could call in, Chris, and say, hey, my dad is going on your therapy. I need to help him find some resources for X, Y, and Z, and we would help connect you versus just giving you 10 organizations and 10 different numbers. We would kind of help filter that out for you.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. And I think just some people don't realize that things out there exist. They just hit Google and they just find the top 10, top few results in Google and just go with what's there and start making decisions based off of that. But for these big illnesses and diseases that are out there, there is an 800 number that is free from all these places that exist that you can call and speak to somebody, and finding who that is. And you brought up a good point too about the support systems. I know my mom also was in the trenches and she was living with them, and obviously dealing with the day to day of everything too. For people that don't have that, these organizations, beyond just, hey, where do I find the best doctor for this, or what clinical trials are available, or can you send me a pamphlet about this? They also have great resources for people that are dealing with the emotional and mental side of these life-threatening illnesses out there, or just caregivers that are overwhelmed. I know, being at conferences, having seen some people that are just and running some caregiver groups at for LRF, that just the overwhelm that comes from that too, and trying to manage this is a lot. So you brought up a really good point about dealing with that side of things too. And I can't even imagine now. I mean, we're recording this in the middle of a pandemic. So right. I have several friends that are going through cancer treatments and surgeries and things like that right now, that all the extra things being mixed in, or they can't, their loved ones can't even be in the hospital with them when they're going through all that. So imagine there's a lot more need for a full, whole body care right now for a lot of families.
Definitely. What we've tried to do is really work on helping, pull the needs of patients out, whether it's with a caregiver or a patient, to really ask them questions to figure out, maybe what is their most pressing need. Because not everyone's just going to call up and say that they're feeling depressed today or they're having a bad day. So we want that to be our job, is to help them figure out what they need if they can't communicate that up front, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and to let them know that it's okay to ask for that help.
Definitely.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Fortunately, we're surrounded by a lot of love, and support in our family, with family and friends. But I having interacted with other people, I know that's not always the case. Or some people are on an island a lot. Whether it's financial or emotional or whatever type of support. Two things I will say, if we have I know we'll have probably a lot of different people watching this, but for people that are caregivers that are out there, a few little tips if you're dealing with things is and you just ask the doctor the permission. I've never met a doctor that said no, but is to record the actual visits with the doctor, especially in the early days when you're getting 1,000 different options and details, and you're driving home. You're like, I think he said this. It's to be 6 cycles of this over 3 days, and we come in and you're like, wait, no, he said that, and you guys are like, no, I think I heard this. when you're dealing with something
Great
so
feedback.
serious, that was huge for us, was to record that. LRF actually have an app for people going through the blood cancer, and one of the things my dad and I were part of the team that are the people that kind of consulted, on the people that would be using it on the front lines and what would you want in an app. That was one of the things we pushed to have in it. Now, of course, every smartphone in your pocket just does recording out of it. You can record something on it, but that was something that was really big for us, was to manage. That was just to record everything so we could go back and listen to it again when we're making really big decisions. And then it was also getting copies of every single scan, every blood test, everything, and getting it turned into a PDF, because every new doctor we went to wanted the full file and everything that was had already been done beforehand. And the two doctors' offices playing tag back and forth and faxing and emailing, that can take days back and forth for them to get everything, versus when you call up and say, hey, we need to get into this. Oh, cool. We're going to need this. This is okay. I got it. I can email it to you right now, or I can fax it to you. And I've got a copy of the disc I can bring. They're like, oh, really? Okay. Then we can get you scheduled and you've got everything. So things like that, and having all the data at your fingertips yourself, helps just for having a bigger picture, being able to read the reports and seeing, but also to just expedite things along and move at a faster pace.
No, that's really good feedback.
Just random tangent there, but
if
we're gonna have people out there, talking about trying to support people that are dealing with this, that might, I know multiple people we told that to. They're like, oh, I didn't even think about that. Yeah, good point.
Yeah, I think people just don't think to ask that. So I can see how that would be hugely beneficial, especially playing for other family members, right? I'm curious, from your perspective, because I'm sure your father goes in and has to have regular checkups with his physician, his doctors, but just in general, knowing that, he has had a cancer diagnosis previously, and whether you say he's in remission or if a physician would say he's cured today, how has COVID kind of impacted you and your family, and just in terms of making sure you're keeping him safe, but also access to maybe some of the medical professionals he needs to see frequently?
Really good question. He has had to definitely put off several different doctor's visits, just for the risk factor, the risk factors. There was a follow-up he did a few years ago, and he had to deal with tongue cancer a few times, and not related to the lymphoma, but he had to have some surgery on that. And then, of course, the last one was a couple of years ago, and so there's still on that every 3 month, 4 month, 5 months kind of cycle.
Yep.
So he was on the every 3 months, and he was supposed to go in for a follow-up like right after all this stuff hit the fan with COVID-19.
Yeah.
So that follow-up finally kept getting pushed off. But it was at the point where last time they're like, we really need to check, make sure that nothing's changing. So I think it was either it was the beginning of this, like in the last 4 weeks or so, I took him up to Johns Hopkins, is where he was dealing with for that. And
Okay.
we drove up there and picked him up and went up and I sat in the car, and he went in and had to do all the screening stuff to get into the building. And, you kind of have that anxious, just walking to the door, that anxious, like, who's sick, who's not sick. And you hear people walking like, hey, I'm here to get tested for COVID. I know, like right next to you. And, and so, I ran back out to the car, and then we used, Facebook Messenger. He was like, can I FaceTime you? I was like, no, I'm on an Android. You can't do that. So I walked him through the Facebook Messenger thing, and he was in the room with the doctor and did a little video chat. And so I was sitting in the car waiting, watching, and asking doctors the questions. So I was still in the room. I still wanted to be there in the room to ask any follow-up questions, see if there's any concerns, things we need to keep an eye on. And then I added mom into the conversation back at their home. So she popped into, so she didn't even have to take the trip on 95, and got to listen to what the doctor was saying as well. And I know just things like dentists and stuff like that, because both my folks, they're in the higher risk. They're in the riskier category, just on the age side of things, but then also my dad with some of his ailments and illnesses and things like that. He is a higher risk person. So they've other than walking around their street and taking some road trips and seeing family very carefully once, there's been really, they've kind of had to stay on lockdown and pick and choose when there's a doctor's visit and when there's not a doctor's visit and what can be put off, like many other people out there. I've heard just some of the impact across the board just for wellness for people that, aren't going to get their annual checkups or are afraid to go for some smaller thing that might turn into a bigger thing. And that I know the medical landscape is kind of, upside down a little bit right now for people getting follow-ups, but it definitely has impacted them. Fortunately, he's not going through cancer right now. It's checkups for things like that. But it still is a concern just going into any facility right now in our region, unfortunately. What about for you and for the work that you're doing? How is that impacting the work you're doing with patients?
Yeah, it's
and
interesting.
Distribution and things like that,
Yeah, no, we've had, as the My BeiGene program, we're talking to patients and caregivers all the time. And, we have seen instances where they were working full time, had great insurance, and then they've lost their job. We're always trying to assess their current situation, because I think patients pride themselves on, their independence, and they think they're going to be able to work full time potentially, or do what they normally do, even after they're diagnosed. And sometimes that's just not the reality. And I think, we see that on our side. I guess I'll ask the final question for you, Chris, is what do you hope to see over the next 10 years from now, just in from the perspective of research, patient care, but also caregiver support as well?
Over the next 10 years, I really hope to see, more cures to come out. It's an easy answer, but it's a true answer, is to have more breakthroughs, more cures. If you look at the last 10 years, that certainly has been the case. And there have been dozens and dozens and dozens of new treatments that have been approved. And I am excited for what the next 10 years will hold and what will unlock. But I think all that will happen if two things happen. One, more funding towards all the cancers. I hope that there are more people out there that, go after the rarer cancers like my dad had, where maybe 2,500 people get it in a year. So I hope that there's more funding across the board for not just the bigger, broader cancers, but also the other ones that are just as important that might just not affect as many people. But I hope, I also wish for more, there is in some of the cancer worlds, but even more collaboration, because you'll have someone over here doing this study and someone over here doing this study, and to make sure that there's great communication between all of the researchers and all the people out there on the front line, so that, they're all working together towards a common goal. But basically more funding. And then I said it's two things. I think the other thing is just to have more patients involved in clinical research, and to make sure that the awareness is raised about it. I think a lot of people have this perception that, hey, I'm a guinea pig if I'm going to go into clinical research. But by the time they're dealing with humans and they're, trying to get people involved there is a certain amount of data and a certain amount of things they already know about what's going on. So I think that just educating more people about the ability for or the potential of being involved in a clinical research study is important. But I look forward to every time I get an email from one of the organizations I'm involved with, or the Lymphoma Research Foundation sends out an email. It's like, hey, this was just approved by the FDA for this cancer or this treatment. And those happen throughout the whole year. So that's always really exciting to see. And I look forward to all of that accelerating. And then I think for caregivers, the internet obviously has changed the game for so many things out there, but I think it's just continuing to raise awareness through great chats like this, and to put more content out there that serves the caregiver side of things too. I think that's one of the things that all the organizations can do more of, and can really try to target just what the caregivers are going through, and let them know what they don't know and give them support. And I think it's just more of that, more of the same. I think it's existing out there already. The internet has leveled the playing field, but I think that more of that, will be exciting to see over the next 10 years. I don't think there's going to be a caregiver breakthrough that I know of, but there probably will be someone with some new platform or some new blogging type thing where you can share, or a new way to connect with loved ones from around the globe. I'm sure that someone hasn't thought it up yet, but there'll be something the next 10 years. I'm excited to see what that is that will help be in a family's corner and help them through that, the uncharted waters of dealing with a cancer diagnosis. But I look forward to hearing more success stories like my dad's